Stay connected to your community and save. Just 99 cents a month gets you 3 months of unlimited access to Inform.com. Visit Inform.com/subscribe and get your first 3 months of news for only 99 cents a month.
Suspected paranormal activity at a World War II-era North Dakota one-room school once reached the FBI. Hi, this is Tracy Briggs, and welcome to Back Then. In April of 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was just named Supreme Allied Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, and he already had his hands full planning the D-Day invasion just 2 months later. Meantime, in North Dakota, officials were also dealing with a daunting affair, something called the most baffling and mysterious fire cases in the state's history. Before it was over, investigators would be speculating whether a one-room schoolhouse in Stark County might be possessed by the devil or terrorized by an evil masked man. It was dubbed the Case of the Jitterbug Coal, and it had fire marshals, teachers, scientists, and government officials puzzled and frightened for weeks. The Wild Plum School is located near Plum Creek, 20 miles south of the small town of Richardton, North Dakota. At the start of the 1943-44 school year, 8 students from early elementary to high school age were enrolled at Wild Plum. Students spent their school day sitting at small wooden desks in the tiny room as lessons were learned and boxed lunches were eaten, all under the watchful eye of teacher Pauline Rebel. But what she saw on March 28, 1944, was unlike anything she had seen before. Mrs. Rebel said as she started to give her students an arithmetic test, she and the students witnessed a pail of lignite coal near the stove begin to stir restlessly without any apparent cause. A story from the Forum from April 13, 1944, picks up the story from there. Then things began to happen. Lumps of coal started popping out of the pail like Mexican jumping beans, striking the walls and bounding back into the room. One student was slightly injured when he was struck in the head. The coal pail tipped over and lumps of lignite caught fire. Window blinds started smoldering, charred, and fell to the floor. A bookcase caught fire, and a Webster's dictionary lying on a table began to smoke and burst into flames. The incident troubled Stark County Superintendent of Schools, R.L. Swenson, so much that he called the state fire marshal to report a series of strange happenings at Wild Plum, which had led residents to believe the schoolhouse to be bewitched. North Dakota Fire Marshal Charles Schultz says when officials arrived on the scene, the coal was still reacting to what he called mysterious forces. Schwartz sent the coal to Dickinson State Teachers College, as well as the University of North Dakota, for analysis. Chemists said both schools found no reason the coal should spontaneously ignite. So, after 2 weeks, Schwartz sent the coal to the FBI in Washington to see if any light could be shed on the case. He said, "We are as much in the dark as when the investigation started." Samuel Gordon, who was the curator of minerals at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, speculated that, given Wild Plum's location in the Badlands, the coal might have just gotten mixed up with fool's gold, which might have caused the combustion. But still, there were no definitive answers. While some in the Wild Plum community speculated a supernatural cause for the jitterbug coal, an interview with the teacher, Mrs. Rebel, led investigators to question whether it was actually the doing of a mysterious masked man who may have been trying to intimidate her. Rebel said, starting in mid-January, she started to find obscene and threatening notes pinned to the door of the school. Special Assistant State Attorney General W. James Austin told the Forum he couldn't release what the notes said because of the ongoing investigation, but he confirmed that there were at least a dozen crudely written notes and that one of them threatened Mrs. Rebel to, quote, leave or be shot, end quote. In an April 15th story from the Forum, Rebel, who the paper referred to as the pretty 22-year-old blonde schoolmarm, said she was more concerned about the notes than she was about the supernatural goings-on. She said, "I'm bothered by the 15 notes threatening my life. I've only taught here 7 months, and I never expected anything like this." Rebel told authorities she believed the notes might have been left by a mysterious man who once showed up at the school. Shortly before that day, when the coal flew around the room and set the classroom on fire, students reported seeing a 6-foot-tall, masked man kicking at the front door of the school, trying to get in. When Rebel came to the door to investigate, he had apparently fled. Could he have been responsible for the notes and the jumping coal? By April 16th, more than 2 weeks after that initial jitterbug coal incident, nearly all of Wild Plum's pupils flatly refused to go near the now-closed school and said they'd never return, even if the school reopened. Well, that didn't fly with many parents. While some were genuinely scared to send their children to school, others were skeptical. According to the Forum, the children's insistence that the schoolhouse is bewitched is in direct opposition to the religious beliefs of their solid, substantial Catholic Russian-German parents. In fact, many of the solid, substantial moms and dads came right out and said they believe the incident was just a very successful hoax. Perhaps parents know their children best. Indeed, it was all a hoax, carried out by the students themselves. The news came out on April 18th. The case of the jitterbug coal was solved. It was a hoax. As the Forum declared of the lignite, it didn't leap, it was thrown. 4 students confessed their roles in the hoax to State Fire Marshal Schwartz and Special Assistant Attorney General Austin, telling them they were playing a trick on their teacher and parents. So, how did they do it? They said there was no masked man. They made him up and faked the sound of him trying to kick down the door by stomping their feet under their desks when the teacher wasn't looking. As far as the obscene and threatening notes pinned to the door of the school, well, they were written by 2 girls, one of them 12, the other 15. But how did the coal fly around? Well, it turns out the students were able to tip over the coal bucket using long rulers and pointers. Earlier, some of them had stuck lumps of coal into their pockets, which they then lit on fire using matches they'd also tucked into their clothing. When the nearsighted Mrs. Rebel wasn't looking, the students threw the lit coal toward the windows, bookshelf, and dictionary, setting them all on fire. Austin said the students didn't really have a motive for their pranks. They just found their teacher gullible, and once the hoax was underway, he says it kind of took on a life of its own. By the end, he says he thinks they might have even wanted to believe the exciting tale of paranormal activity and a dangerous masked man. He said they apparently lived the mystery in their imagination. When the investigation was wrapped up, the case was sent to juvenile authorities to review possible punishment for the 4 young suspects. Records have not been found that indicate what happened to them. Austin said one of the most astonishing aspects of the case was how the students involved, who were between the ages of 11 and 15, stuck to their story and even managed to fool the lie detector tests performed on them. Austin said it was this apparent sincerity on their part in describing the happenings at the school that at first led us to search for an adult hoaxer. So here we are nearly 80 years later. Are there any lessons to be learned from the case of the jitterbug coal? Well, here's some takeaways I thought of. First, when older people claim how well behaved they were in school, they shouldn't always be believed. Second, when a teacher starts to give a math test, be on the lookout for flying, flaming objects. Finally, you can never underestimate what children will do to get out of going to school. Thanks for listening to Back Then. I'll be back with another episode next week.
Get reliable and accurate local news with Inform.com. Inform.com is your trusted local news source with journalists dedicated to keeping you informed about what's happening in your community. Visit Inform.com now.